Welcome, everyone. We are here for Grasshopper's The Power of Using Your Voice webinar. For those of you who don't know me, I am Heather Miller. I'm the founder and CEO of Grasshopper, which is a mobile app for female identifying and non-binary mentors and mentees. Our mission is to increase the number of women and diversity talent in leadership roles. And on the app, you can build your profile, connect with peers, connect with mentors and mentees, share knowledge, and learn from role models. In addition to helping our women connect on the platform, we provide a slew of resources on professional development for everyone, regardless of gender, like this webinar. And we are running this particular webinar because last month we focused on how women were using their voices or expressing themselves as we were leading up to the election in whatever capacity, whether it was through their personal platforms, work, art, business, you name it. We've invited Rebecca Chen, who is the VP of Marketing at Action Button, Mary Keane-Dawson, who is the CEO of Takumi, and Montana Morgan, who is Strategy and Operations Manager at ClimateVoice, to showcase how their companies and platforms are giving people a voice and to provide us with some tips and tricks for personal advocacy. Throughout the webinar, I would encourage you all to use the Q&A function to ask our panelists questions. We will have a 10-minute Q&A, open Q&A at the end. So we encourage your thoughts and questions. And without further ado, I would love to welcome our amazing panelists. Let's start with Rebecca.
Awesome. Thanks so much for having me. Super excited to be here. I'm Rebecca. I'm the VP of Marketing at Action Button. This election season was very pertinent for us because we are all about connecting people to the power of their civic voice. So with Action Button, we really encourage users to take instant action on issues that matter to them. So around the election, we had a ton of get out the vote actions and really helped people make sure that they were registered to vote.
Fantastic. Thank you. Let's move to Mary.
Hi. Thank you so much for inviting me to this panel today. Really appreciate it. It's great to be here. Takumi is one of the world's largest influencer marketing platforms. We match influencers to brands and also to organizations that want to use, get their opinions on what's happening in the world. And yes, it's all about connecting people and enabling them to express themselves creatively.
Ooh, fantastic.
And make money and be paid for it.
Yeah, we have lots of questions for you. Montana, please introduce yourself.
Hi everyone, thanks so much for having me. I'm Montana. I'm working for an organization called ClimateVoice as a strategy and operations manager, and we're a new nonprofit that's mobilizing the voice of the workforce to get corporations to speak up on climate policy at the state, local, and national level. And our organization was just really born out of this idea that corporations say they care about climate, but they're not doing enough to fight the climate crisis. And the best way they can do that is to speak up on climate policy, and just realizing that employees in the workforce and using your voice is the key to get companies to speak up and just really make an impact. So that's what we're.
Great. Thank you so much for joining us. And finally, but not least, we have Amy Zhang. Would you introduce yourself?
Yes, hello. Hi, everyone. I am a business development intern on the team at Grasshopper. I'm also a sophomore at Barnard College, which is a historically women's college in New York City. I'm studying econ and Spanish there, and when I'm not working on class or working on stuff for Grasshopper, I've also been contributing to a mental health app called Unmasked for college students. So you can check us out.
Great. Thank you so much for those introductions. As I said, our audience and I have lots of questions for you. So let's get started with the first question, which was actually submitted before this webinar, and it's for Rebecca. And the question here is, how does Action Button encourage the public to exercise their voices, and what type of impact did Action Button hope to make during the election?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think step one is Action Button really showcases that everyone does have a civic voice and it does matter. I think oftentimes it's easy to think, you know, if I'm emailing my legislator, are they actually going to read my email or answer my call? And it's important to remember that they were elected to represent your viewpoints. So they have a duty to represent your voice. And so through our product, let's say you're reading an article about the wildfires happening in California or hunger in COVID. It's a product that is embedded in those articles that enables you to, on the spot, email your legislator to demand action on that issue. So we're really making it as seamless as possible for people to take action and showcasing that their voice does matter. And during the election, as I mentioned, we pushed out a lot of get out the vote action. And I'm happy to say that we registered voters in 44 states, over 10% registered for the first time. And we partnered with Voto Latino to specifically mobilize Black and Brown voters and mobilized 1 million young voters. So it was really great to see the impact that could be achieved through the Action Button itself.
Wow, that 1 million, that is very impressive. Fantastic. I do have some follow-up questions, but we will move on and I'll grab them later. Then the next question we have is for Mary. So Takumi focuses on connecting businesses with influencers that drive business outcomes. How do you encourage your influencers to use their voices, but also stay true to the brand that they represent and true to themselves?
Well, they have to stay true to themselves and their audience, because the audience has selected them. So there's a kind of curation relationship there that I think is incredibly important for us to acknowledge and to celebrate. The very fact that people would choose to follow you, I think is you know, there's an embedded responsibility within that. And if you think about that's one of the reasons why it's so compelling for brands to work collaboratively with influencers and creators, so they get the very best context, right? The influencers and the creators know their audience better than anybody, and so brands need to be able to de-risk that. You know, they have to let go, if you like. And I think what we've seen during the pandemic in particular is just this realization that, you know, I mean, we've got like 35,000 influencers on our platform, and they're in, you know, they're all over in the United States and North America and South America and Europe and increasingly now in Asia and Australasia as well. So I could pretty much say to you, I've got a creative director in every place in the world, because that's what the best creators, best influencers are really brilliant at, you know, creating compelling content. And that's really what brands are looking for, because they want that engagement. But it also has to sit comfortably and not alienate the audiences. So I think that the best creators and the best influencers are, you know, they're able to do that. And we just won 4 golds at the Drum Social Buzz Awards for a campaign that we did on TikTok with about 25 different influencers. And it was for Haagen-Dazs, the ice cream. And it was just great fun. And they did a brilliant job. I mean, it was absolutely superb. I'm very proud of the work that we did, but it was our creators who did that. It was, you know, they took the brief and they interpreted it, and then they made it happen, you know, and they had a lot of fun doing it.
That is fun. So just on the technical level, how do your influencers match with the brands that they represent?
So when you sign up to the Takumi platform, if you're an influencer or a creator, we go through a process. So we verify your audiences. We ask you some questions, you know, about what you're interested in. You know, for example, you mentioned their climate change, and also we talked about the presidential election recently. You know, any kind of activism or in interests that you have, such as your non-binary sexuality or whatever it might be. You record all of that, and then we try basically we hold that information on you, and so when we take a brief from an advertiser, what we call brand match, and so we will then, you know, the platform does all the heavy lifting, disseminates all the complexity and data and so on and so forth, and then we will have a short list, and then we will talk to you, you know, via the platform, the app, about the campaign, working out whether it's, you know, a good fit or not. And then we submit a short list to the clients, and then from there on in, we manage the process. But most of the heavy lifting is done by the platform.
So interesting. Fantastic. Thank you for that. The next question we have is for Montana. And the question is, how do you encourage people who align themselves with ClimateVoice's mission to use their voices as employees to spread the word? Because we understand, as you said in your introduction, the employees are kind of the action behind the voice here.
Yeah. So I think for us, it's really about just educating employees that their voices do have power, and regardless of their job title or their seniority, that they can advocate for change at their organization. And so that's really the first step for us, is just educating employees about their power. And second, we try to provide a platform for them to advocate, whether it be anonymously, or they can also choose to let companies know who they are if they would like. And so we have a climate positive career pledge, where we essentially allow employees to sign a pledge on our website and say, like, I want to put my voice behind this piece of policy. And that really allows them to advocate in a way that feels comfortable for them. So it's not, you know, asking for a meeting with the chief sustainability officer. It's just using your voice in a way that's has the power to create change by aggregating it with many other voices at your company that are doing the same thing. And we've also launched a few petitions that are more company specific, and just really trying to provide multiple different outlets for employees to use their voices in a way that feels comfortable to them and also has the power to bring about change.
Follow-up question to that. So how do you educate employees about how to use their voices? What are some of the tools that you use?
Yeah, so we have been developing a few toolkits for both employees and students in their roles as future employees that they can use in interviews, particularly because that's a great time to show employers that you care about this, is by, you know, when they ask you a question like, do you have any other questions for us at an interview? It's just asking them, what are you doing to advocate for climate policy? And that just really shows companies that you care about this issue. And we have other policy guides on our website that help employees understand like which policies are important to advocate for. And so we have a whole host of tools and toolkits that employees can use.
That's really helpful. And one other thing, you mentioned the outlets. So can you give us an example of one or two outlets for employees, as you said, if they don't want to, you know, try to book a meeting with the chief sustainability officer? What are their other options?
Yeah, so like I said before, we have our climate pledge, which is a great way that you can anonymously advocate. And we take privacy really seriously. So if you say you don't want your name to be given, then, you know, you will be counted anonymously. And similar with petitions, it's another great way. And just kind of providing a bunch of resources to make sure that, you know, employees know which questions to ask and that they feel like they are empowered to speak up. So, yeah.
Great, thank you. That's really helpful. Let's move on to the next question, which is for Rebecca. So obviously, this has been a very complex year in many different ways. Do you see any trends in how people are using their voices to impact change?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's really interesting because our company was founded in 2015. So I call it pre-2016 era.
Yeah.
And it's just been amazing to see the transformation in people's willingness to engage civically and speak up from 2015 to 2020. Back in 2015, we were really trying to encourage the lowest threshold actions, like tweeting at your legislator, right? And now you see people like willingly phone banking for political candidates in ways that they haven't before. So I think using their civic voice is something that people feel more comfortable doing more so than ever. And also realizing that it's not enough to just tweet or sign a petition. Like, yes, that is absolutely a great start. But how do we go beyond that and really connect with our legislators in a way that's actually going to drive change? So it's interesting because we are a technology platform, but the research still shows that some of the more like high touch action, like calling your legislators or going to a town hall in person, are still the way to really enact change, even if it's easier to just tweet or send an email. So that's something that we're still trying to grapple with, is like knowing how to actually enact change, and also the ways that people feel most comfortable speaking up and the easiest ways to speak up are not always aligned.
That makes sense. What do you think, if you could kind of fast forward, if you could be future thinking, what do you think the next trend would be, or that next level that you're hoping to push people to?
Yeah, absolutely. So something that we're kicking off at Action Button soon is this notion of how do we capitalize on the energy that a lot of people had around phone banking, where they got together in a community setting to make calls in support of political candidates, and bring that to other issue areas as well, and push for other laws and push for other change to happen with regards to certain issues. So that's something that we're kicking off. We're going to be calling them action hours, and really in a community setting, getting people together to take action together, because we realize that a sense of belonging is really key for people to continue to take action. So rather than having them do it in silos, how can we do it in a more collective way?
That's fantastic. I'm just curious, how do you propose to do this, get people together? Because, we think about this at Grasshopper all the time in terms of our ambassador program, which we're just launching, which we're going to talk about, or, even our team, when we think about next level, how are you proposing to do this in a remote setting? When you talk about getting people together and kind of, fostering that sense of community.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, as we're doing right now, I think Zoom and Google Hangouts and Hopin, there's so many great virtual platforms to gather people. And there's been a lot of great innovation during COVID. For instance, even around the death of Breonna Taylor, there was a company that popped up called Culture Greetings, and they enabled people to send snail mail and postcards demanding justice. And that was something you could do remotely, where they would handle the shipping and the mailing for you. And so I've seen a lot of companies like that pop up that make it easier to take virtual action, even with offline action.
That's great. Thank you for that. Next question is for Mary, I believe. How do global events and politics impact the brands you represent? And do you see shifts in the emerging classes of influencers as they respond to changing brand needs?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. And I think it's something that, to Rebecca's point there about the activism and the sense of connectivity between influencers and their audiences as I said earlier, is a real responsibility. But I absolutely think that we are seeing this. It's a really interesting piece that, for example, TikTok and Insta and YouTube, etc., they allow you as a creator, as an influencer, as a human being, to have this unique experience. You can express yourself in your own unique way. And as I'm sure you guys will all understand, we're in this interesting period of history where hyper individualism is very much part of how we express ourselves, right? But at the same time, I think that Gen Z and Gen Y are basically finding you know, they're alienated by traditional media formats in a lot of instances. And, you know, because it's so extreme, you know, I mean, the news is so extreme, you know, there's always someone kind of controversial has to be, you know, to just get the eyeballs on it. And I think that what we've found with our influencers and you know, especially the ones that I would describe as kind of the independents, you know, they're not just doing it because they want to have a pout and pose shot, you know, they actually do really feel very strongly about veganism, or they're passionate about LGBT, you know, they're passionate about you know, non-binary rights, so on and so forth. And I think that expression allows them to, you know, people to connect with them. And as I said, you know, from our advertisers and our brands perspective, you know, this is what the future looks like, right? And you've got a responsibility to your community and your audience. And if, you know, you need to listen up to what they're saying. And that's how we position it with brands, you know, that this is, that you're connecting with the biggest almost like research group in the world, right? Because of the way that they express themselves. So I think that we are seeing, I'm not sure I'd like to use the word class of influencer, but I definitely think we see on our platform a much more of an, you know, we don't do the kind of hype house stuff. So, you know, we don't, if that exists and it's out there, but it's not what Takumi does. What we're trying to do is basically, our vision for the world is to allow our creators and influencers to realize their creative expression, their human expression. And in so doing, being able to, you know, earn a living or make some money, and also connect with their community. And I'm quite passionate about this, as I'm sure you can probably tell, but I believe that this is the future of democracy, because if it doesn't matter who you are, right?
Yeah.
You know, it doesn't matter what you do, it doesn't matter where you live. You know, if you've got a message and you've got, you know, and you want to get that out there, then you can do it from this kind of mobile studio that I'm holding in my hand.
Yeah.
And you can connect with your audience. And I think that's really full of joy and optimism and empowering for people. And, you know, I think it's a fundamental human right that people should have access to social media and the opportunity to express themselves in a creative way, and connecting with that audience. So I do believe that brands are very much listening to and are participating with this, because they have to listen to their audiences. And that's the power of social media, and the voices of the individual can be heard, and the community at large. And I commend both Montana and Rebecca's businesses, because I think that, you know, this is really, really important for the future of humanity. I mean, don't underestimate, you know, there are lots of very big threats out there, as we've just been through some of the existential crises of the pandemic. But yeah, I think brands are changing, and they're definitely responding positively to this. So I'm very optimistic that we are in a good place as we enter into 2021.
I'm happy you're optimistic. I've never heard the term independence, which I really love. But for our audience, just to clarify, when you talked about hype house, can you tell us, for those of us who don't know, what that means in sort of in your world?
Sure. So we don't take talent and then manipulate them to become like soap opera stars, you know, like the Love Island look, or that's not what we do. That's much more of a sort of talent management approach to influence and creator. And it's certainly got a place. I'm sure, you know, people on this call or in the community that are watching it will have their favorites and so on and so forth. But for Takumi, it's very much about working with what we call micro influencers and macro influencers. That's people who've got, you know, maybe up to 2 or 3 million followers, and then smaller influencers who maybe have, you know, a few thousand. And we do a blended kind of approach, which allows our brands to get very high engagement levels with audiences, but also to achieve the reach that they require, so that they know the message is getting out to as many people as possible. But it has to be done in a very authentic way. So we're encouraging people who join the Takumi platform to be creators, people who want to express themselves creatively, rather than a kind of editorial, soap opera type of context. That's not what we do. That's not what we do. And that's usually referred to as a kind of hype house approach. So ours is much more like, we would, if we were rock bands, we would be somewhere around the Coldplay, in terms of our people having an independent spirit, rather than, like Love Island stroke Kim Kardashian approach, which is not what we do.
That's very helpful. Thank you. Thank you for that. Great. The next question, I believe, should be Montana. So how has ClimateVoice found the right voice to respond to local and global political views on climate change? I know, obviously, in the media, we've heard all sorts of things with this president that don't necessarily follow, science or I'll leave it at that. So I'm just curious, how ClimateVoice is reacting to this and helping, as you mentioned, employees kind of express that.
Yeah, absolutely. So at ClimateVoice, we're really focused on just science-based climate policy. And for us, that means, the policy has to actually achieve the decarbonization that we need, but it also has to do so in a way that's just and that makes sure that frontline communities are positively affected and not adversely affected by any policies that are implemented. So that is extremely important for us. And it's also important to have those frontline communities like at the table so they're the best ones that know what will help their communities or hurt them. And so we really believe in those two things, making sure that they have a seat at the table and that the policies are just, and also that the legislation is science-based and we're advocating for it. And then beyond that, I think in terms of using our voice and how to kind of navigate the political landscape is, and also the landscape within companies, is we are really focused on remaining business friendly. So, I think it's important to think about when advocating for change is sometimes, it's nice to be able to remain business friendly so that they will still listen to you and you can work as partners together to achieve the change that you want to see. And there's absolutely a place in the world for, really strong activism that is adversarial to business, but we really believe that if we can work to partner with businesses and bring about the change that we need and still push them to bring about change, but do so in a way that's friendly, that can create the most action that we want to see.
That makes sense. Can you give us an example of a frontline community?
Yeah, so actually one of our advisory board members, her name's Isha Clark, and she's been working on the frontline communities of Oakland, who's just been really adversely affected by kind of dirty industry in Oakland. And so she's herself started an organization, and it's people like that we just want to have a seat at the table, because oftentimes it's easy for politicians and economists to come up with policies that they think will work to combat climate change, and they do work in the sense of decarbonizing, but what's really important here is the people that it affects, and if it's not helping the people that will be most affected by these policies, then it's really just not a good policy. So that's...
Thank you for clarifying. That's really helpful. And our next question, if I'm not wrong, I would love to ask the three of you the same question. So we'll start with Rebecca, since we've been, trying to be orderly here. But taking this conversation to a more personal level, how can individuals bring their true selves to their communications at work, school, in their personal negotiations, and beyond?
Yeah, absolutely. I love this question and had a really fun time reading through previous responses from previous webinars, by the way. I would say, especially as I believe that we will all be partnering with businesses or other organizations or individuals at some point in our life, it's really important that when we go into those conversations, we really have an open mind and are open to hearing what would be a growth opportunity for the other person, business, or organization. Amy, I don't know if you want to go to the next slide, but I've sort of, is there a slide with the, perfect. So how I like to phrase it is rather than focusing on, okay, here's what I want to get out of the conversation, focus on really setting an intention and being present to what the other person's needs and wants are so that you can create these opportunities together. I think oftentimes, especially in a capitalist society, we're so focused on, okay, here's what you're going to do for me and here's what I'm going to do for you. It ends up feeling very transactional. And oftentimes, if you go into these conversations with your blinders on, you aren't even listening to what would be a value add for them. So more tactically, how I like to structure some of my outreach emails is, hey, I saw you're doing really great work in XYZ. I have a few ideas for how we can partner together, but I'd love to hear what would be an opportunity for you. So that way you show them that you've done your homework, you have some ideas in mind, but you're not laying them all out there, because then that already puts them in the defense of, oh, these are the only ways in which this person wants to work with me. So I think it's really important to, keep that open mind when you're reaching out to someone for a partnership or an opportunity.
Great, thank you. Amy, do you mind toggling back to the question just so that both Mary and Montana have it there when they're speaking? So Mary, your thoughts on this?
Oh, I think you're on mute, Mary.
I'm so sorry. Please excuse me. I completely agree with what Rebecca just said, actually, about approaching the piece from a kind of collaborative perspective, because you should look at these things as being partnerships rather than, opportunities per se. Of course, there are opportunities, but they must be, you've got to, this whole piece around collaboration and cross-fertilization, I think, to empower us as women, as much as voices, as, whatever your background is, I think is really important. And I think that, as I mentioned earlier, this creative expression piece and the humanity, I think where I am, I think we're at this really interesting kind of juxtaposition of where technology and humanity are, at this kind of point. And I think this is why we're seeing the growth in such enormous numbers of people engaging in and being passionate about getting their voices out there. I'm very, very much the belief, and I think it's very important that people, keep express themselves, but also keep a record of that expression, and also how they evolve. People's opinions change over time through their experiences and so on and so forth. I think getting feedback is really fundamental, and it's something that we should embrace because it empowers you. It's not, criticism is not, it's not about diminishing you. It's about actually feeding you to and to gain confidence in what you're doing and how you're expressing yourself. And I think that one of the things that I'm very big advocate of for young women who are trying to find their voice is, there's nothing wrong with reading poetry out loud to your friends or to one another or to just yourself. And I recommend it to people for two reasons. First of all, it's very enjoyable, and poetry is really powerful as a means of expression, but also it helps you gain confidence in how you're articulating things. And you'd be surprised at how much that can impact when you're then put into a situation where you need to speak publicly, like we are here today on Zoom, or in the real world rather than the virtual. I think you'll find that it's a great, it's very enjoyable, and it's a really good way to to connect yourself with your creativity. I read poetry all the time, and I find it very, very beneficial.
I love that. Thank you. And then we'll bring it to Montana. Your thoughts on this question?
Yeah, so I think that one of the best and easiest ways you can bring your true self to work is to just seek out organizations and people within organizations that really align with your values. And, if you find people that believe in what you believe in, they will want to advocate for you as well. And you'll find it much easier to be authentic in your communication. And, it's not always easy to just say, well, you should go out and quit your job and find a different organization. But I think there's things you can do to, find clubs or organizations like within your workplace, or you can start a club if it doesn't exist yet, or if you're working at a smaller organization, like start a new initiative. And there's a lot of things you can do to bring your values and communicate authentically at work that I think a lot of people could be well served to take more advantage of. So
I just had a thought as you were speaking. A lot of our listeners are students who are just starting the recruiting process. And you kind of tapped into something when you said, bringing your own values and finding a company that aligns with your values. How do you do that research, or how do you ask the right questions during interviews? I know you mentioned before giving people the tools for interview purposes. I'm wondering if you have any tips for our listeners.
yeah, I think it's always great to ask about company culture and say, what do people at your organization care about? Like, what activities do you do outside of the bounds of the business? And what is your company ethos like? I think those are some great questions. And even just perusing their website, like I feel like you can get a good sense, or even their social media accounts, if they have those, you can get a good sense for what they care about and their values from that. And yeah, definitely just asking questions and talking to people that work at the organization will give you a really good sense of the values and if they align with yours.
Thank you. That's really helpful. Now, I think we were going to go on to our tips and tricks. And I think both Rebecca and Mary spoke to this. Anything else that you both have to add to your tip here, or do we feel confident that you covered your thoughts?
Well, I'd like to add that I think it's really important to not to suppress your entrepreneurial spirit as well. And I encourage, if you see an opportunity, or you think you could do something better, or that you explore it, because I know we've touched on capitalism in a number of different ways as we've been speaking about it, but we live in a society where we can innovate, and we can improve our commercial and our wealth creation, so that we can achieve more as women and as collaborators with men. And as I run quite a big company myself, I've had 3 experiences in my life where I've seen something and I've thought that could really be improved, we could do this much better, and I've gone out and raised the money and built the company and then gone on to sell them. And that's something I really encourage women to think about, as well as learning new experiences and the companies and organizations that you work in, but also think about your business creativity and how you can maybe work with your friends, or with find business partners so that you can build your own companies.
If you feel comfortable, would you mind sharing one of those experiences where you saw the solution and sort of created it?
Yep. So about 20 years ago, I was working for a large public PLC, so listed on the stock exchange, and they had within their business, they had a number of different companies that were all kind of competing with each other. It's not uncommon in advertising and communications that happens. And one of these businesses was at the time an in-flight entertainment business, and it also had some publishing in it. And I went with my business partner at the time, and we raised the money to buy the business out because we knew we could do a much better job of it and make it a far more successful company. And so that's what we did. And 12 months later, we sold that business to WPP, which is Sir Martin Sorrell was then in charge. And I went to work for WPP and spent probably about 3 years in the United States growing the business, winning American Airlines, United Airlines, all of the big airline companies. So, and then, you know, that was a great experience, and I felt very empowered, and it was a means by which I could express myself, if that makes sense, as a business leader. So, and since then I've done it twice again, and I'm hoping to do it a fourth time with Takumi. So yeah, I mean, you know, business can be exciting, and building culture and building opportunity is really fundamental, but everything in my view is about your attitude and about your willingness to explore and to engage, and you know, and also to take some risks, and not, you know, and not be frightened to fail, because, you know, failure is part of growth, and you don't really know how sweet success is unless you've tasted, you know, the downside too. So I don't ever regret, is my personal advice. It's all learning. It's all about learning and bringing that learning to, you know, the next challenge that appears. My company during the pandemic has gone through a huge amount of change. But we go into 2021 in a much stronger position than we went into 2020. So I'm you know, I'm happy, and I'm very lucky to have the people that I have working with me. I really, really am.
I know team is so important. And you just made me think of something. I read this really interesting article yesterday on Ty Haney, who used to be the CEO and founder of Outdoor Voices, who was sort of controversially, we'll say, ousted or left Outdoor Voices during her maternity leave. And it's been a year since, and because of confidentiality, she hasn't really until yesterday been able to speak to her experience. And the article yesterday was speaking exactly to what you just mentioned in terms of the risk and the failure, and using that failure to grow. And actually, you know, she has taken all those lessons that she learned, come back to Outdoor Voices, not as the CEO, as the founder, and is kind of seeing, well, where are my weaknesses, and how do I supplement that with team and the right people to kind of support me. So it's very, very interesting in terms of risk taking and feedback taking and keeping everything. I wouldn't say positive, but just having a healthy growth mindset when you're going through these experiences.
Yeah, 100%. Because you know, the things you've got to watch out for are founder's syndrome, where your ego goes out of control, and it happens, and there's loads of examples of it. But the other thing is, surrounding yourself with sycophants is a really bad idea, because they're not going to show you the alternatives or the different ways that the problems can get solved. And you know, I think it's really important to recruit people to your startup or to your, you know, multinational corporation and anything in between, that who are complementary to you in terms of skills and approach, and they've got different lenses, which is why diversity is such a critical importance to the growth of the corporation and as we move forward, because we need to represent the people that we are selling to. You know, we need to be those people, and that's one of the major reasons why I love the work that we do at Takumi, because, you know, we are always striving to include people from different backgrounds and with different opinions and different voices. So our brands actually are connecting with that you know, wider audience, rather than just, you know, their own personal experience, if that makes sense.
It does make sense. And you took some of the words out of my mouth, thinking through diversity on teams and such. Montana, I want to give you the space to talk through your tip here.
Yeah. Well, first I just want to say I love all those points you made about advocating for yourself, and I totally agree. I feel like um, feel the fear and do it anyway is one of the best pieces of advice I've ever gotten. And I just think as women, oftentimes we can talk ourselves out of opportunities that we want even before we can have a chance to apply or ask for them, or advocate for ourselves. And I think a lot of times we can get in our own way in that sense, because it's oftentimes just that we're not asking for it, and therefore we don't get it. So I think feel the fear and feel the discomfort, and oh, I don't want to advocate for myself, but just do it anyway. And I think so often you'll be surprised at the results, because oftentimes it's all in your own head that, I'm not enough. But if you tell yourself that you're enough and you lean into the discomfort, then I think it can produce incredible results. So.
I went to a leadership conference held by McKinsey a couple of weekends ago, and they brought up something interesting. Of course, and what you said made me think about it. I think the stat is, we as women, and everybody knows the stat. I hope I have it right. Need to feel like we have 99% of the credentials to actually, before we put ourselves out for something, whereas men have, in general, way more confidence in this particular area and kind of, put themselves up for opportunities without the credentials. And one of the things that they brought up was making sure that management is aware of this tendency, or our own personal biases or fears, and making sure that management encourages employees to put themselves up for opportunities, put themselves up for promotions. And so it made me think of this, as you said, kind of feel the fear, do it anyways. What are some of the ways that, that's difficult. It's easy to say, feel the fear and do it anyways. Do you have any tips for people in terms of, this is a great mantra, but tips for actually implementing this, whether in the workplace or personally?
Yeah, I think for me, just thinking about, what's the worst that can happen, exactly as Mary was saying, like you have to take chances and you have to take risks. And if you fail, that's a learning experience, and that's also useful. And I think just realizing that you're going to be fearful of failure, but you have to put yourself out there and try, because otherwise, like, what's the point of living, right? And I think so that's a big factor for me in thinking through leaning into the fear. And then I think recognizing that we need to just lean into the fear and not be afraid of failure.
I've got a piece of advice that I would give
Please.
join gangs. It's really important, because that gang mentality damages young women all the time. It damages, because if you want to fit in with the kind of the Heathers or whatever it might be, you've got to realize that, your individuality is actually you. It's who you are. And, and it's so important that you connect with that, and collaborate with others and partner with people, of course, but don't sort of start setting down these rules that, make you better than everybody else, or for that matter, because actually what lands up happening is you alienate yourself from other people, and you don't get that feedback, and you don't get the collaboration opportunities, and I just really, really encourage you to think, have friendships, of course, in your group is the same as you, or looks the same as you, or thinks the same as you, because then you just land up in a world where you're in an echo chamber. And You've got to reach out and understand that other people have different opinions, engage with them, talk to them, and you learn. And you also, that's where opportunity comes from, you know. Be polite. You know, people reach out to me all the time on LinkedIn, and I try to help them and to answer the question or point them in another direction, what have you. And it's paid back dividends to me a million times over. But it also creates good karma, and you know, so build my company. But the point is, the two aren't right. But if you go into a gang, you know, and you just listen to what everyone in the gang is saying, then you know you don't learn anything. You just basically are, you know, kind of hearing the same stuff over again, and that's what causes insecurity, because you then feel like you don't fit in when you have an opinion of your own, and you should never be afraid of your own opinion.
100%. Two things to build on what Mary and Montana both said. Montana, to your point on how we can more tactically like feel the fear and do it anyway. I found that accountability, again, is a very powerful tool. So if I'm setting a scary goal for myself, telling colleagues about it and making it known to hold scary into the fear. And then Mary, on not just surrounding yourself with yes men and building an echo chamber. I think it's really important that when someone does challenge you or say something provoking, you reward them for that. You say, thank you so much for challenging my viewpoint, or for, you know, asking me this provocative question, because otherwise people will not know that it's safe to challenge you in that way. And you want to encourage people to do that more. So I think it's really important that you give them like an outsized reward for speaking up and challenging you.
Absolutely, 100%. I totally of that. When my CFO says to me, no, Mary, you can't do that, and I go back and say, well, yes, I'm going to do it, and I'm going to do it like this or whatever. Yeah, we have a debate, and I find that incredibly valuable. It's really, really, really important, and I thank him, and I thank the other people. Very suspicious when people just tell me how great I am all the time, because then I'm like, why are you doing this? You know, because I'm not. You know, I'm just a human being, you know, that's trying to build a company, and I need, you know, you need the feedback.
Yes. Thank you all. We actually have just a bit of time left, and we have a great question from one of our audience members. So I'm going to, Amy, I just pinged it to you since you can't see the Q&A. So I'll let you read this off, and perhaps if we have time, we can go to maybe one more question that was sent to you earlier.
Totally. Yeah. As long as I stop sharing, I can see them now. A question for all panelists. What led you to the work that you do now, and what have you learned from your time, past internships, or any previous positions that have allowed you to succeed in what you do now?
Awesome. I'm happy to take this one. So kind of to build off of the conversation we were having around like making sure you find an organization that aligns with your values, I agree with that. I think the best way to find out what environment works for you, though, is to just dive in and start trying different environments. So you can read as much as you want about company culture, but you're not going to know until you actually get there. So just for context, my first role out of university was at a big CPG company, AB InBev, you know, very matrixed global environment. And from there, I then feel the difference in those two very radically different work environments to know which one was for me. And I knew that the only way that I could do experiential learning, not by reading about the company's mission statement. So that's what I would really advise everyone, especially if you're early in your career, is the fastest way you're going to learn is just by actually throwing yourself into that environment.
I've had a long career. It's not over yet either. But one of the key things that I did when I was in my 20s was I went on an outward bound course, and I fell into a gang of blokes or men. I was the only girl in the gang. And I remember thinking, I am going to get out of this pothole if it's the last thing I do. And I managed to somehow shoot up into the air. And these guys couldn't believe, because they were all thinking that they were going to rescue me. And it was a really, really, really poignant moment for me, because I realized that, you know, I had it in me to do something underestimate them was really, really strange, because they were all like, how did you do that? You know, the thing is, you don't underestimate yourself, because believe you me, other people will. So, you know, risk, lean into the fear and just go for it, because that's the way you learn. And you'd be amazed at how it works, because it's worked very well for me for the last 33 years.
An incredible story. Oh my gosh. Heather, I think I'll pass it back over to you for going over the ambassador program.
Sure. I just want to check in, Montana, any thoughts on that question and about your journey and how you got to where you are?
Yeah, absolutely. I think for me, it was, again, going off what both of you said, just leaning into the fear of, oh, I'm not going to take like the right path, and getting scared of, you know, where I'm starting and is this going to set me up for the future, and just kind of recognize finding paths, and everything you do is going to teach you something and set you up for your future, and not being worried about getting the right role or the right thing. Like, you will naturally find and gravitate towards like what is good for you. And so just go out there and do it, and don't be scared of you know, doing like the conventional thing or the right thing. I think that's what I've learned.
That is very reassuring. I have full faith in my ability to find the right time, but as you know, parental pressure, societal pressure, it's always like pick something and stick to it now, which I think is pretty unreasonable. But that is really reassuring to hear. Thank you.
Beautiful. We have 2 minutes left on the clock, so I want to be respectful of time. So thank you so much, Rebecca, Mary, Montana, for offering your time and your wisdom. And thank you for all of you grasshoppers for joining us early in the morning and letting us get to know you. We have one exciting announcement, and that's that we launched our our ambassador program yesterday. So our Grassambassadors represent all genders, and they are the backbone of our community. They give our community the wings to soar, and by promoting Grasshopper's values, sharing our news, organizing events, you know, really representing our values, you'll have the opportunity to, one, modernize mentorship for the next generation, elevate mentorship so that more women are aware that it's a thing, and democratize mentorship so that young women can reach beyond their circumstances to connect with new communities, schools, networks, and places of work. So if you are interested in this program, you know, you'll get tons of marketing and training experience. Kudos for your resume. You'll be able to network with our other Grassambassadors, our male allies, and our Grasshopper community, and of course, have fun. So please feel free to visit our website, check out the program, and apply that way. We look forward to seeing you on the next webinar, but in the meantime, please feel free to connect with us on our social media platforms at Grasshopper. And thank you again to all of our wonderful panelists and moderators. I hope you all have a beautiful day.
Thank you.
I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.